And according to both of them, what's unfolding right now is the most talked about celebrity financial story of.
The invitation appeared to offer Meghan and Harry a path back into the royal family. But buried beneath its carefully chosen language were restrictions, neither expected conditions controlling where they could stand, whom they could meet, and what they were forbidden to discuss once palace doors closed. Whispers of a possible reunion had begun moving through private royal circles long before the public heard anything. To supporters, it sounded like the first real sign that years of bitterness might finally be ending. Inside the palace, however, the reaction was far less hopeful. Advisors began preparing for risk, senior households demanded control, and old fears returned almost immediately. Harry wanted to believe the invitation meant something personal. He saw it as a rare opening to repair the bond with his father before more time was lost. He also believed his children deserved a connection to the family history they had inherited, even if their parents had stepped away from royal duty. For Harry, accepting the invitation was not surrender. It was a final attempt to protect what remained. Meghan was less convinced. She studied the wording carefully and noticed how little emotion it contained. There was no clear promise of reconciliation, no guarantee of a private family discussion, and no assurance that they would be treated as relatives rather than public problems. To her, the reunion looked less like forgiveness and more like a controlled palace operation designed to create the appearance of unity. Then came the confidential conditions. Their arrival route would be approved in advance. Their access to senior royals would be limited. Press contact would be forbidden. Private conversations could not happen without prior agreement. Even their movements inside royal property would follow a strict schedule. Palace officials claimed these measures were necessary. They feared leaks, confrontation, and another public account of what happened behind closed doors. But to Harry, the rules carried a deeper insult. He had been invited home, yet every condition suggested he was no longer trusted inside it. He became trapped between gratitude and humiliation. Accepting the terms might make him appear weak. Refusing them could destroy the reunion before it began. The confusion deepened when different royal households sent conflicting instructions. One message promised a private meeting. Another denied it. One advisor spoke of family healing. Another referred only to protocol. The contradictions exposed a hidden truth. The palace was not united. Then, Meghan noticed something more disturbing. On internal planning documents, Harry was described as a member of the family. Her own name appeared under separate restrictions, written as though she were a security concern rather than his wife. The invitation had clearly not been approved by everyone. Rumors suggested one powerful royal was already threatening to withdraw if Meghan entered the palace. Meghan warned Harry that the reunion had been designed to fail. Harry heard the danger in her voice, but he refused to walk away. If they stayed silent, he believed the palace would control the story before they had even arrived. Yet the restrictions were only the beginning. Because before Meghan and Harry even arrived, a private battle had erupted over who would be forced to face them and who intended to make sure they never reached the family gathering at all. Behind palace walls, the family was already splitting into opposing camps. Some believed Harry's return could heal years of public damage. Others feared Meghan would expose what had been said in private, and one senior royal allegedly threatened to leave rather than sit in the same room. The conflicting instructions sent to Harry were not simple mistakes. They reflected a deeper struggle spreading across the royal households. One side believed the family could not survive another year of open hostility. They wanted a controlled reconciliation, a private conversation, and some sign that father and son could still stand together. The other side saw danger in every meeting. To them, private access meant private words could later become public weapons. Charles stood in the middle of that divide. Part of him wanted to see Harry without advisors, schedules, or prepared statements. Time had already taken too much from their relationship. Yet fear followed that desire. He knew one emotional conversation could be remembered differently, repeated publicly, or used to challenge the palace account. William was far less willing to take that risk. He believed the reunion had been arranged too quickly and under too much public pressure. Without accountability, he feared it would become another performance in which Harry and Meghan gained sympathy while the family was expected to remain silent. Catherine remained outwardly composed, but the position forced upon her was impossible. A warm greeting would be presented as forgiveness. A distant one would be called cruelty. Even silence could be turned into a message. She was not simply preparing to meet Meghan, she was preparing for every movement to be judged. Camilla's household demanded even tighter control. Seating, introductions, timing, and access all became subjects of negotiation. Her advisors feared that old accusations could return the moment Harry entered the room, pulling years of resentment back into the center of royal life. Princess Anne questioned why tradition should be altered for two relatives who had chosen to step away from duty. Her concern was not only personal. She believed changing the rules would make the monarchy appear weak. Soon, younger members of the family were quietly warned not to discuss titles, inheritance, private properties, or future royal roles. The message was clear: speak politely, reveal nothing. Then whispers began circulating that Meghan had prepared direct questions about security, the children's place within the family, and promises made before their departure. Each household started protecting its own interests. What had been called a reunion was becoming a negotiation between rival power centers. But the most dangerous subject was not an apology. Harry claimed Charles had once given him a private assurance, and he intended to make his father acknowledge it. When officials discovered that Harry expected a private father and son meeting, alarm spread immediately. William objected. Camilla's advisors intervened. Neither side wanted Charles alone with a son carrying years of unresolved anger. As the family prepared to defend its secrets, Harry was preparing to demand answers, and the private promise at the center of his return would soon turn a tense reunion into something far more dangerous. Harry was not returning simply to exchange polite greetings. He carried the memory of a private promise made before his royal departure, a promise concerning protection, belonging, and his children's future. The palace considered it outdated. Harry considered it the reason he had agreed to come back. Years earlier, when stepping away still seemed like a temporary change rather than a permanent separation, Harry believed Charles had offered him reassurance. Leaving official duty, he was told, would not mean losing his family completely. His children would still belong. They would remain connected to royal traditions, protected when necessary, and welcomed into the private life of the monarchy. Harry held on to those words because they made departure possible. They allowed him to believe he could escape the pressure surrounding Meghan without cutting his children away from their heritage. But once the couple left Britain, the meaning of that assurance began to change. Protection became conditional. Private access grew harder to arrange. Invitations seemed uncertain. Each time Harry asked what had happened, the answer became less personal and more official. What he remembered as a promise was slowly treated as a misunderstanding. That betrayal now sat at the center of the reunion. Harry was not asking only for an apology. He wanted the family to acknowledge what had been agreed before distance, interviews, and public anger hardened every position. Palace officials, however, rejected the claim. Nothing had been formally written, approved by senior advisors, or entered into any official arrangement. In their view, private reassurance could not bind the crown. Meghan warned Harry not to accept another emotional conversation that produced no clear result. Sympathy was not protection. Affection was not access. A father's comforting words meant little if the institution could later deny them. The dispute reached beyond security. Would their children be included in future ceremonies? Would they be allowed into royal residences as family rather than visitors? Would they be recognized in private traditions that never appeared in public announcements? Inheritance added another layer of danger. Harry believed certain personal items connected to Diana should one day pass through his branch of the family. To him, they were not merely valuable objects. They were proof that his children had not been erased from their grandmother's story. William had already been warned that Diana's legacy might be raised during the meeting. That changed everything. Any discussion of property, memory, or promises could quickly become an accusation about who had the right to protect her name. Charles wanted to avoid legal language and speak only as a father. Harry no longer trusted that approach. He believed personal emotion had repeatedly been used to delay firm commitments until nothing remained except regret. And Meghan had something the palace did not expect: a copy of an old message that appeared to support Harry's memory. Then, Harry received the revised schedule. His private meeting with Charles had been shortened. Another royal would now sit beside the king as a witness. That single change transformed the reunion from a family conversation into a controlled interrogation, and when Meghan saw who had been chosen to sit beside Charles, she understood exactly what the palace was preparing to deny. The room looked welcoming, but nothing inside it had been left to chance. Meghan's chair had been placed away from Harry's. Documents were already waiting on the table. And the royal selected to witness the conversation was someone whose presence changed the balance of power immediately. From the moment the reunion began, every detail was controlled. Staff managed who entered first, where each person sat, when the doors closed, and who was permitted to speak. What had been presented as a family meeting now felt governed by rules designed to prevent any unplanned moment of honesty. Then Meghan and Harry were separated. Harry was directed toward Charles, expecting the private father and son conversation he had been promised. Instead, William was already there. His presence changed the meeting before a single difficult question had been asked. Harry understood immediately that this was not reconciliation on equal terms. It was a conversation with a witness. He felt ambushed. He had returned believing he would finally speak to his father without advisors shaping every sentence. Now, every admission could be challenged, every memory disputed, and every emotional response judged before Charles had the chance to answer. Elsewhere, Meghan faced palace officials and the documents waiting for her. They asked whether she would agree not to discuss the reunion publicly. The request was described as protection for everyone involved, but the wording told a different story. The restrictions applied directly to Meghan and Harry. Palace staff, however, were not bound in the same way. Carefully authorized briefings could still shape public opinion, while the couple would be prevented from responding. Meghan saw the trap. The palace could define the reunion, deny any confrontation, and present its preferred account, while she remained silent. She refused to accept it. At the same time, Harry's meeting moved toward the subject both sides had avoided. The palace expected him to acknowledge the damage caused by interviews, accusations, and public disclosures. Harry expected the family to admit what Meghan had endured before those disclosures began. Neither side agreed on where the conflict started. To the palace, the betrayal began when private pain became public. To Harry, it began when private pleas were ignored. Every attempt at apology, therefore, sounded like another demand for surrender. Then, Harry raised the forgotten promise. William questioned whether Charles had ever made such a clear commitment. Perhaps, he suggested, Harry had turned emotional reassurance into something more permanent than it was meant to be. Harry's anger sharpened. Charles appeared shaken, but advisors had already warned him not to confirm anything that could create a binding expectation. So he remained silent. That silence told Harry more than any denial could have. Then, Meghan received the final condition. Unless she signed the confidentiality agreement, she would not be allowed into the main family gathering. The palace believed the ultimatum would force Meghan to surrender, but her refusal triggered the very confrontation officials had spent months trying to prevent and exposed why the royal reunion was already collapsing. The disaster did not begin with shouting, insults, or a public scene. It began with one quiet refusal. Meghan would not sign. Harry would not enter without her, and when Charles was asked to choose between palace protocol and his son, his hesitation answered everything. The family gathering could not begin, because neither side would move. Meghan refused to sign an agreement that allowed palace officials to shape the public account while denying her the right to answer. To her, it was not protection. It was silence, disguised as courtesy. Harry made his position clear. He would not enter the main gathering without his wife. If Meghan was treated as a threat, then he would not pretend the reunion was about family healing. Charles now faced the choice everyone had tried to avoid. As a father, he wanted Harry to stay. As king, he was surrounded by advisors warning that one uncontrolled conversation could create another public crisis. His hesitation stretched across the room, and Harry understood exactly what it meant. William argued that removing the conditions would reward years of criticism and leave the monarchy exposed. Harry answered with fury held just beneath control. He accused his brother of turning reconciliation into submission, demanding obedience while calling it peace. Then came the emotional breaking point. Harry looked directly at Charles and asked whether he had invited his son home or summoned a former working royal to negotiate surrender. Charles tried to calm the confrontation. He spoke of trust, responsibility, and the need to protect everyone involved. But he would not dismiss the advisors. He would not remove William. And he would not continue without witnesses. That refusal hardened something in Harry. Meghan then produced the old message. Its language appeared to support Harry's claim that protection, family access, and a future connection for the children had once been promised. For a moment, the palace position seemed to weaken. Then, officials challenged it. They questioned whether the message was complete, whether other exchanges had changed its meaning, and whether emotional reassurance had been mistaken for a permanent commitment. The implication was brutal. Harry and Meghan were presenting only the part that served them. But Meghan saw something else. The meeting had never been designed to settle the past. It had been arranged to secure their silence before an announcement. The palace was preparing to restructure royal duties, residences, inheritance expectations, and ceremonial roles around the direct line of succession. The changes could permanently reduce Harry's future place and weaken his children's connection to royal life. Harry turned back to Charles. Had he been invited because his father loved him, or because the palace feared his reaction once the decision became public? Charles did not answer directly. That silence ended the reunion. Harry stood, reached for Meghan's hand, and prepared to leave before meeting the rest of the family. But leaving would not end the crisis, because the moment Harry turned toward the door, a second secret emerged, one that made the failed reunion look less like an accident and more like a carefully constructed trap. Harry had believed the reunion was about healing. Instead, he discovered that the palace was preparing a decision affecting his family's future. The timing was no coincidence. Before the announcement became public, officials wanted his cooperation, or at least a photograph, suggesting that peace had already been achieved. The hidden announcement concerned a new royal structure built around two priorities: the direct line of succession and those still carrying out official duties. Publicly, it would be described as modernization. Privately, its meaning was far harsher. Family members outside active royal service would receive less ceremonial visibility, fewer expectations of inclusion, and no guaranteed place in future traditions. For Harry, the danger was immediate. His titles might remain, but his branch of the family could slowly disappear from royal life without any dramatic act of removal. His children could still be named within the family while being excluded from the moments that gave those names meaning. That was why officials had wanted Meghan and Harry inside the palace before the announcement. Their presence could be presented as acceptance. A carefully arranged photograph had already been discussed, one image showing Charles, his sons, and their families together, suggesting that private wounds had been healed. No agreement was required. The picture would tell the story. Meghan recognized the strategy at once. They had not been invited only as relatives. They had been invited as symbols. Their faces could soften an announcement that reduced their future place while protecting the monarchy from accusations of division. Then the deeper consequences emerged. Access to royal residences could become more restricted. Private security arrangements might be reconsidered. Expectations surrounding family properties could change. Even heirlooms connected to Diana might be managed according to the needs of the working monarchy rather than the emotional claims of both sons. Harry heard one message beneath every explanation. His children would inherit the history, but perhaps not the belonging. William defended the restructuring. He believed the monarchy had to become smaller, disciplined, and protected from relatives who no longer represented it officially. To him, this was survival. To Harry, it was proof that his brother no longer saw him as Diana's son, but as a threat near the crown. Charles insisted the changes were institutional, not personal. Yet his discomfort exposed the truth. The system might have created the policy, but he was still the father choosing to approve it. The dispute became sharper when officials discussed the proposed family photograph. No clear answer had been given about whether Harry and Meghan's children would appear. Meghan's suspicion deepened. Were the children family? Or were they useful only when their presence served the palace? Then came the most calculated revelation of all. A statement had already been drafted describing the reunion as warm, private, and constructive. It had been written before the reunion collapsed. Meghan demanded that it be withdrawn. Officials warned that refusing the photograph would make her and Harry appear responsible for destroying the peace everyone expected to see. With the palace preparing one version of events and Meghan refusing to become part of it, the conflict moved beyond the private room, and the next battle would be fought through leaks, headlines, and carefully chosen silence. Before Meghan and Harry had even left the building, journalists began receiving contradictory accounts. One source described the couple as demanding. Another claimed the palace had humiliated them. The reunion was no longer private. Someone inside had decided that the battle for public sympathy must begin immediately. The first reports favored the palace. Meghan, they claimed, had rejected a reasonable agreement created only to protect the family's privacy. Her refusal was described as proof that she had arrived unwilling to compromise. The message was simple and damaging. The reunion had failed because Meghan would not accept basic boundaries. Then, a different version began to spread. According to another source, Harry had been ambushed. The private meeting he expected had been filled with witnesses, legal language, and pressure to accept changes affecting his children's future. What the palace called protection now sounded like control. Neither side knew exactly where the leaks had begun. That uncertainty destroyed what little trust remained. Palace officials suspected Meghan and Harry had prepared their own briefing before arriving. Meghan believed the palace was releasing selective details while still demanding her silence. She urged Harry to respond immediately. If they waited, she warned, the first version would become the accepted truth. Once the public decided who had ruined the reunion, every later explanation would look defensive. Harry hesitated. Another statement could protect Meghan, but it could also confirm the accusation that he was incapable of keeping family matters private. He had spent the entire reunion demanding honesty. Now honesty itself threatened to destroy his final chance of repairing his relationship with Charles. That relationship was already being controlled. Advisors warned Charles not to contact Harry privately. An emotional message, an apology, or even a moment of uncertainty could weaken the palace's official position if Harry later revealed it. William refused to soften the planned statement. He believed vague language would allow Harry and Meghan to claim they had been wronged without challenge. In his view, the monarchy could not remain silent while others shaped the story. Catherine feared the opposite. Another public war would damage everyone, especially the children growing up between competing versions of the same family history. Then the leak became impossible to dismiss. A journalist reported that Meghan had refused to sign the confidentiality agreement. That detail had been discussed only inside the supposedly private meeting. Its appearance in the press proved her deepest concern. Silence would never have protected both sides equally. Meghan pointed to the report as evidence. Had she signed, the palace could still have briefed against her while she remained unable to answer. Harry possessed messages, schedules, and enough detail to challenge the official account. But releasing them could expose Charles's private uncertainty and destroy whatever remained between father and son. Then his phone received a personal message from Charles. It contained one request: do not speak publicly. The palace version was already spreading. That message forced Harry to make the most painful decision of the reunion: protect the father who had failed to defend him, or protect the wife who had warned him from the beginning that the palace would never change. Harry came to the reunion hoping to recover part of the family he had lost. Instead, he was forced to choose between private loyalty and public truth. Whatever he decided would wound someone, and the monarchy knew his silence might be more dangerous than anything he could say. In the end, Harry did not release Charles's private message. He protected the father who had failed to protect him, even though the decision left Meghan exposed to a palace narrative already moving through the press. It was not forgiveness. It was restraint, born from the fear that one final disclosure could destroy whatever remained between them. Harry and Meghan issued a carefully controlled statement. They did not reveal the documents, the argument, or the hidden announcement. They said only that the reunion had ended because equal terms could not be agreed. The palace answered with language designed to calm the public. Officials denied that any major confrontation had occurred and insisted that reasonable security and privacy measures had been necessary. Yet one detail could not be explained away. There was no family photograph. The image prepared to prove unity had never been taken, and its absence became the clearest evidence that the reunion had collapsed. Supporters of Meghan and Harry accused the palace of arranging reconciliation for public relations. Royal supporters blamed the couple for rejecting compromise and turning another private opportunity into conflict. Behind the official statements, Charles was left with regret. He understood that the meeting may have been his last realistic chance to repair the relationship before future changes hardened the divide. But regret came too late. When Harry needed him to choose, Charles had remained king first and father second. William drew a different lesson. He became more determined to prevent future negotiations from weakening the monarchy. To him, the failed reunion proved that private access created unacceptable risk. That position made permanent separation more likely. For Meghan, returning had confirmed her deepest fear. The institution still viewed her as a problem to manage, not a family member to understand. Harry left with an equally painful realization: royal love was never freely given. It came tied to duty, obedience, and silence. Then the palace delayed the disputed restructuring announcement. The decision suggested that Harry and Meghan's resistance had disrupted plans officials believed were already settled. But the most dangerous development came later. A second invitation was quietly discussed. This time, Meghan's name was missing from the preliminary document. Harry could soon face an even harsher choice: return alone and risk betraying his wife, or refuse the invitation and close the door on his father permanently. The reunion failed, not because the family had nothing left to say, but because every side feared what honesty might expose. Was it destroyed by Meghan and Harry's refusal to accept royal control, or by a palace that wanted the appearance of peace without paying the price of truth? The reunion may be over, but its consequences are only beginning, because the next royal decision will reveal whether Harry is still considered part of the family or merely a problem the monarchy has decided to contain.